Loyalty doesn't leave clean scars. It carves its own map through bone and memory and breath, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it leads you back to the one thing you thought war had already taken. The sun on the pier was brutal, bouncing off gray Navy steel and puddles of fuel-slick water. Dress whites glowed under it, a tight formation of sailors standing at attention, facing the ship. At the center of it all, a single man knelt on one knee on the hot concrete, hat tucked under his arm, jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped. Luke Walker didn't feel the heat. He felt the weight of the leash in his hand. On the other end, a Belgian Malinois in a Navy K9 harness quivered, muscles taut, ears pricked, dark eyes locked on him like the rest of the world had vanished. The dog's chest rose and fell fast, breath puffing in the humid air, tail held low but wagging in a tight, anxious arc. "Military working dog Thor," the officer in khaki called, voice echoing against the ship's hull. "By order of the United States Navy, you are formally released from active duty, effective this date." Behind the officer, a row of brass suits and cameras watched. Somewhere in that line, a familiar corporate smile waited for an ending he didn't deserve. Somewhere, a boy pressed his face to his mother's side, small hand buried in fur, just out of frame. Luke's fingers trembled on the leash. The officer raised a folded sheet of paper, the formal order. "Your service is hereby commended as..." Thor whined, a soft, strangled sound, and leaned into Luke's knee. The handler's free hand dropped, almost involuntarily, burying itself in thick fur at the back of the Malinois' neck. His eyes burned. This was supposed to be victory. Instead, somewhere deep in his chest, it felt like a last stand being fought in dress whites with too many witnesses. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story stays with you, please consider subscribing to join our community. 10 days earlier, the world had smelled like bleach and old metal. The kennel block on base was all hard lines, concrete, chain link, fluorescent hum. Luke walked it like he always did, boots tapping a rhythm between the cages. Dogs stirred as he passed, nails clicking, tails thumping against steel. Some barked, sharp and hopeful. Some only watched, eyes bright in the dim. He moved without looking at the nameplates. He didn't need them. 2 pens from the end. A muzzle pushed through the chain link before he even stopped. Thor's breath warmed his knuckles before he raised his hand. The Malinois whined low in his throat, nose shoving insistently, until Luke's fingers found their familiar place behind one ear. "Easy, buddy," Luke murmured. "I know. I'm late." Thor's tail thumped harder, entire rear half wiggling in a contained explosion of energy. He backed up as Luke slid the latch, then sat automatically, muscles trembling with restraint. Harness on the hook, lead clipped, silent hand signal. The dog moved into heel position like he'd never forgotten how. They walked the narrow aisle together, canine pressed tight against his leg, not because he had to, but because that was where Thor chose to be. Outside, the early light was still gray. A thin fog clung to the asphalt. Kissed with the faint tang of the sea, Luke drew in a slow breath, feeling his shoulders loosen by degrees. Out here with the leash in his hand and the steady, patient weight at his side, the noise in his head receded. Chief Mac's voice still lived in that noise, a gravelly ghost from a past deployment. Some promises don't fade. They wait. He hadn't understood it then. He was starting to. They hit the training field at a jog. Thor's drive came alive the second his paws touched grass. Ears forward, eyes scanning, reading Luke's body language for the smallest cue. Luke signaled off-leash and unclipped the lead. Thor didn't bolt. He looked up instead, waiting. "Search," Luke said quietly, hand cutting through the air. The Malinois launched, a streak of tan and black. Nose dropped, tail leveled. Pace shifting into that focused, economical trot Luke knew by heart. They'd hidden the training explosive under an empty ammo crate earlier. Watching Thor work was like watching water pour downhill. Natural, inevitable. Luke tracked him, eyes on the dog's back. There, a subtle change in head carriage, a hitch in the trot, that almost imperceptible odor change that still made his gut clench. Thor's breathing changed, faster, shallow sniffs layered over deeper draws. He slowed, circled once, then sat sharply, nose cutting to the crate, gaze flicking back to Luke. Textbook alert. "Good boy," Luke said, the words catching faintly. He moved in, knelt beside him, hand on the harness. The memory came uninvited. A street half a world away, the same shift in Thor's body. The same alert he dismissed because some part of him had been too tired, too sure. He'd lived. Others hadn't. Thor pressed against him now, as if to anchor him. Luke realized his hand was gripping the harness too tight, and forced his fingers to relax. He rewarded the dog, letting Thor chew and thrash on the tug for a long extra beat, letting the joy of work have the last word over the ghost of that blast. By the time they walked back toward the kennels, the fog had thinned. The base was waking up, distant engines, shouted cadence from some early PT run, the metallic clank of something dropped on the pier. Luke was almost at the kennel door when he noticed the clipboard. It sat on a metal cart by the entrance, half buried under a stack of forms. The top sheet had his handwriting, feeding log, nothing special. The sheet beneath it didn't. Final disposition, MWD Thor, it read in block letters. His feet stopped. Wind moved a loose edge of paper, the fluorescent light above flickered faintly. Thor bumped his leg, sensing the shift in his handler's body, head tilting, ears pricked. Luke's throat went dry. He slid the top form aside. Underneath, in neat impersonal print, were the words that made his stomach drop. Recommended euthanasia. Justification aggression, unfit for further service or adoption. Something in the kennel corridor seemed to go very quiet. Even the hum of the lights receded. Luke became acutely aware of the warmth of Thor's flank against his calf, of the steady sound of the dog's breathing. Thor sat automatically, eyes flicking from the paper to Luke's face, reading him as easily as he read scent on the wind. Luke folded the form in half with hands that wanted to shake. "Not happening," he said under his breath. That was when a shadow fell across the doorway, blocking the light, and a voice he didn't recognize said evenly, "Petty Officer Walker, I'm going to need you to step away from that kennel." Thor's low growl vibrated against his boot before Luke even turned around. The man in the doorway wore khaki slacks and a windbreaker instead of a uniform. ID badge clipped to his belt, sunglasses pushed up on his head, though there was nothing bright in here but the flicker of old lights. Beside him stood Chief Barnes, the new kennel master, arms folded, expression carved from something that didn't bend easily. Luke straightened, one hand on Thor's collar. "Sir?" The civilian stepped in, letting the heavy door swing closed behind him. The sound cut off the outside world with a dull, final thud. "I'm Daniel Carver," he said, voice smooth, practiced. "Risk management liaison for the base. We're conducting a review of all animals listed with prior incidents." His gaze dropped to the folded form in Luke's hand. "Looks like you found the disposition paperwork." Thor's ears flattened a fraction. The Malinois leaned subtly into Luke's leg, reading tension the way other creatures read weather. Luke held Carver's eyes. "Who recommended euthanasia?" Thor's fit. His last eval was clean. Barnes shifted his weight. "Walker, let's move this to the office." "No," Carver said mildly, stopping him with a small lift of 2 fingers. "The animal is here. The handler is here. Transparency is useful." He turned his attention fully to Luke, as if cataloging him. "Military working dog. Thor has 3 logged aggression flags in the last 12 months. 2 controlled, muzzle in place, no contact. 1 with contact. He was working," Luke said, "on all 3, and none of those were unprovoked." Carver tilted his head as if listening to some internal audit. "The last incident report states he lunged toward a miner. Teeth made contact with exposed skin. The miner required medical evaluation. A scrape Luke snapped. He put himself between that kid and a vehicle that wasn't stopping. Kid bolted off the sidewalk. Thor did his job. Carver's gaze flicked to the dog. Did he? Thor's tail had gone still. Not tucked, not wagging, just still. His eyes never left Luke's face. The air felt thicker, full of bleach and dog hair, and something sour that had nothing to do with the kennels. Luke forced his voice down. Sir, Thor's record downrange is spotless. 2 tours, multiple fines, 0 blue on blue. You don't throw that away over a liability write-up. Barnes cleared his throat. Walker, you know how this works. Anything outside deployment changes the calculus. Stateside bites put the Navy in the spotlight. The board voted. I signed the form. Carver here is just carrying the ball. Carver smiled a little at that, but it didn't reach his eyes. We have donors and contractors sharing this base, petty officer. Public image matters. So does risk. An animal with a flagged history presents exposure, especially if certain parties are eager to make noise. For a second, Luke saw the last certain party clearly, a senator's grandson, cheeks still flushed from the near miss, crying against his mother's designer blouse. The SUV jerking to a stop inches over the crosswalk. Thor's body wedged between the bumper and the boy's knees, harness scraping metal. The mother hadn't screamed at the driver. She'd screamed at the dog. Luke had still been replaying the misread months earlier, the odor change he'd ignored, the blast that followed. The lives folded into that mistake. So when Thor went from loose heel to explosive guard in a heartbeat, Luke's hand had been a hair slow. The Malinois' teeth had grazed the boy's arm as he shoved him backward out of harm's way. One pink line of broken skin, an entire storm of paperwork. Luke blinked the memory away. The kennel smelled like the same recycled air it always had. The concrete beneath his boots felt solid, grounding. What's the timeline? He asked. Carver didn't bother with euphemisms. Euthanasia is scheduled for 72 hours. There is an appeals process in the manual, but in practice, these recommendations stand. It's cleaner for everyone. Not everyone, Luke thought. Thor shifted, muscles tense under his hand, gaze flicking to Carver just once. His nostrils flared, taking in scent. Laundry detergent, cologne, faint hint of coffee and printer ink. No fear, no respect. Just cataloging. Petty Officer Walker, Carver went on, I understand handlers form attachments, but this is about safety and liability. We can't afford another incident. Neither can you. Something in the way he said that last part made it clear he wasn't talking about Luke's feelings. Barnes looked tired. Luke, I'm not handing him over like defective gear, Luke said quietly. If he's done working, he comes home with me. That's the policy. Policy says he's adoptable if he clears temperament and medical, Barnes replied. The board just decided he doesn't. Who's on the board? Luke asked. Vet, legal, command, risk management, Carver said smoothly. We already met. We already voted. You were notified via chain of command yesterday. Luke thought of his unread inbox, the emails he'd ignored after a 12-hour duty shift. A cold, crawling anger threaded under his ribs. He took a slow breath, tasting disinfectant and the faint meat smell from the feed room. Somewhere down the row, a shepherd pawed at metal, restless. This isn't over, Luke said. Carver's smile sharpened by a degree. That's the thing, petty officer. It is. I'm sorry. I truly am. 3 days from now, Thor will be at peace. You should use that time to say goodbye. He turned to Barnes. Until then, kennel confinement only. No off-base work, no training outside controlled protocols. I'll need documentation if that changes. Thor's growl bubbled up again, low and uncertain. Luke laid his hand flat on the dog's neck, fingers slipping under the harness edge, feeling the steady thrum of his pulse. The Malinois leaned into the contact, then went quiet, trusting. Understood, Luke said, though he meant the opposite. Can I put him away now? Barnes nodded once. Carver stepped aside. Inside the run, Thor turned immediately when Luke unclipped the lead, refusing to retreat to the back like he usually did. Instead, he sat squarely at the gate, chest against the bars, eyes searching Luke's face. The metal clicked shut between them. The sound was too loud. Luke stayed there for a long moment with his hand wrapped around the wire. Thor pressed his nose to the same spot, breath warming Luke's skin through the tiny gaps. Outside, a gull screamed somewhere over the pier. A cooler door slammed. Life on base kept moving. In here, the fluorescent light buzzed, and the seconds started counting down. That night, the kennels were different, quieter. The usual chorus of barks and shifts and snuffles had faded with lights out. The concrete held the day's heat like a tired sigh. Luke walked the aisle in the dim, red-tinted emergency bulbs painting everything in low submarine hues. Thor was awake before he reached him. The Malinois rose from his mat in a smooth, soundless motion, paws barely whispering against the floor. He came to the front, tail giving one small, controlled sweep. No whine, no bark, just a presence waiting. Luke crouched, forearms resting on his knees, forehead close enough to the bars that he could feel Thor's breath. The dog tilted his head, one ear pricked, one relaxed, caught between alert and ease. "They think you're done," Luke whispered. Saying it out loud tasted wrong. "They think a line on a form says what you are." Thor blinked slowly, then pushed his muzzle through and jammed it against Luke's chest, hard enough to rock him backward a fraction. It wasn't subtle. It was a shove that said, "Move, think, act." A tiny echo of every time he'd done the same on a doorway, waiting for a clear, on a stairwell where the air didn't smell right, on a sidewalk where a kid had stepped one stride too far. Luke exhaled, long and thin. His hand curled in the dog's ruff. Somewhere back in training, Chief Mac's voice surfaced again, softer this time. Some promises don't fade. They wait. 3 days. He could follow the process, file appeals, ask politely, hope that the same board that had read Thor's life into a paragraph would suddenly see him differently, or he could recognize what his bones already knew. The system wasn't built to save one dog when it was easier to sign a form. Bootsteps sounded faintly at the far end of the corridor. Luke straightened, instinctive. The shadow that appeared against the red light wasn't Carver's this time, smaller, narrower, a familiar silhouette from the vet's office. "Walker?" Dr. Elena Morales kept her voice low as she approached. Dark hair braided tight, scrubs under a navy hoodie, tired eyes that missed nothing. "You're not supposed to be in here after 2200. "Couldn't sleep," he said. It wasn't a lie. She looked at Thor, then at him, then at the folded papers sticking out of his pocket. Her jaw flexed. "They told you," she said. "Yeah." She blew out a breath through her nose. "Carver's pushing hard. Command's listening. I voted no on euthanasia, for whatever that's worth." Luke's fingers tightened on the gate. "They'll do it anyway." "Not if you make enough noise in the right places," she said quietly. "These cases get reversed. Not often, but it happens. You've got service records, commendations, other K-9 handlers who'll back you. You're not powerless here, Luke." The idea felt foreign. He'd spent his life following orders, not fighting paperwork. "What's the window?" he asked. Morales checked her watch. "Officially, 72 hours. Realistically, less if Carver convinces Command to move it up to avoid drama." Her gaze drifted to Thor. "He'll be sedated. He won't know, but you will, so will I." Thor's nose bumped Luke's hand again, a small, insistent pulse of contact. A gust of wind rattled something loose outside, making the whole building shiver. For a heartbeat, the three of them just stood there in the red half-light, the handler, the vet, the dog, caught on the edge of a decision. Morales broke it. "If you're going to fight, start tomorrow. Early, JAG office, chain of command. Anyone who owes you favors." She hesitated. "And Walker? Be ready for someone to fight back harder. Thor's not the only thing at stake in this mess." "What else is there?" he asked. She shook her head once. "You'll see. Just don't underestimate Carver. He doesn't care about dogs. He cares about money and risk. And there's a lot of both tied up in this base." She turned to go, footsteps soft on the concrete. Luke stayed until Thor finally lay down, still as a shadow, eyes open and fixed on him. Only when the Malinois' breathing evened slightly did Luke push to his feet. He looked down the long row of cages, past the sleeping shapes and quiet forms, out toward the darkness beyond the steel door. "Okay," he said, mostly to himself. "We'll do it your way first." He touched the bars one last time. Then he walked out into the night with a plan forming, a clock ticking, and no real idea how deep the fight would go, or how many people would stand in his way before Thor ever saw home. Morning came in thin gray layers, light seeping around the edges of the blinds in Luke's base apartment. He'd slept maybe an hour. The rest of the night had been spent fighting the urge to go back to the kennel, to sit on the concrete, and pretend time didn't move if he didn't look at a clock. The coffee in his mug was burnt and bitter. He drank it anyway. His dress uniform felt strange after so many days in working cams. Stiff collar, polished boots. The mirror showed a face older than 34, lines cut sharper around the eyes, jaw set too tight. By 0730, he was outside the JAG office, file folder in hand. A framed photo of the base's commissioning ceremony hung on the opposite wall. Smiling officers, ribbon cut, sun on the water. In the corner of the shot, almost out of frame, 2 K9s sat at heel, tongues out, eyes bright. He stared at them until the door opened. Petty Officer Walker? The lieutenant wore Legal Corps insignia and an expression that said she was already 3 cases behind. "Come in." Her nameplate read Harris. Her office smelled like paper and air freshener. Stacks of folders leaned precariously on a metal bookcase. She gestured to the chair and took the file from him. "Appeal of an MWD euthanasia decision," she said, flipping through. "Thor, I've seen his name in commendations. Good record." "Great record," Luke said. "And one bad report written by somebody who didn't see what actually happened." She scanned the incident summary, lips pressing together. Off-duty base housing crosswalk, minor involved contact with teeth. She glanced up. "You understand how fast command goes to red alert when a dog and kid show up in the same sentence." "He saved that kid's life. The SUV didn't stop." "And you were the handler of record at the time," she said, not unkindly, "which is why you're here instead of washing your hands of it." Luke looked down at his own hands, knuckles faintly scarred, nails cut short. They rested on his knees, fingers laced to keep from clenching. "Ma'am, Thor's not broken. He's not unstable. He did exactly what I trained him to do, put his body between danger and someone who couldn't see it coming. I'll own my part of that. I was slow on the hold command. I misjudged his read, but putting him down for that." He shook his head once. "That's not justice. That's someone covering their ass." Harris leaned back, eyes on the ceiling for a moment. The fluorescent light above them hummed softly. "Here's the thing," she said. "You're not wrong. The process has room for commander discretion. Euthanasia is recommended, not mandatory. In theory, I can help you draft a formal appeal, challenge the risk assessment, bring in character witnesses, present alternate mitigation. In practice, Carver's already been here," Luke said. A ghost of a smile touched her mouth. "You're not dull. Risk management came in last week with a whole stack of exposure items. They want this base expansion clean, no prior incidents, no ambiguities. They made it clear that if the Navy looks indecisive on internal discipline, certain civilian partners might reconsider funding the new pier. And that, Petty Officer Walker, is a language command speaks fluently." Luke pictured the new construction down by the water, the skeletons of cranes and pilings, the temporary fences with contractor logos. He hadn't thought about where the money came from. That was above his pay grade. "It's still one dog," he said. "One handler, one call you can reverse." Harris studied him for a long beat, fingers idly tapping the folder. Outside the window, a seagull coasted on an invisible current, wings motionless. You have 36 hours before the order is set in stone, she said. I can file an emergency stay. That buys us time, nothing more. Carver will push back. He'll go to your CO. He'll bring up anything he can find to paint Thor as a liability and you as compromised. Compromised how? She slid another sheet toward him. His own name was at the top. Below it, lines of text he knew by heart. A mission 3 years earlier. A blast. A casualty list. The words, handler misinterpreted initial K9 alert, sat in the middle, like a bruise. Your file isn't spotless, petty officer. I know, Luke said quietly. Carver knows too, Harris replied. He's already pulled it. He'll argue there's a pattern. Dog acts, handler misreads, someone gets hurt. It's not fair, but it's a story. People buy stories. He thought of sand and heat, and the sound after the explosion, a high, constant ring that cut through everything. Of his MPC then, a different Malinois, whining in confusion because he'd done what he was trained to do and his human hadn't listened fast enough. Thor had come later when he wasn't sure he deserved another partner. He felt a familiar weight under his sternum, an old, dull stone of guilt that hadn't eroded with time. What do I have to do? He asked. Harris pulled a legal pad toward her. I'll file the emergency stay. You need to get statements, other handlers, vet staff, anyone who's seen Thor work and can speak to his stability. You get me enough credible testimony. I can build a case that euthanasia is excessive and adoption with restrictions is reasonable risk mitigation. She met his eyes. And you need to stay clean while we do it. No confrontations, no midnight heroics. Carver will be watching for anything he can call emotional impairment. Understand. It felt like being told not to breathe while running uphill, but he nodded. Yes, ma'am. She scribbled a note, then hesitated. Walker, why this dog? You know there are others, younger, easier paths. The answer was simple and not. Because nobody else was there when he took his first bite of cordite in a live firehouse, Luke said. Nobody else knows what he's done, what he's walked through. If I don't stand up for him, who will? Her gaze softened by a fraction. Good answer. Now go get me people who'll say the same thing into a recorder. He left the office feeling both lighter and more exposed, like he'd stepped out of armor without a plan to get it back on. The day blurred into conversations. At the K9 unit classroom, Sergeant Myers, a blunt, sardonic handler with a sleeve of tattoos, recorded a statement, eyes flat with sincerity. Thor's as solid as they come, he said into Harris's loaner device. High drive, clear head, clean outs. I'd work behind him anywhere, anytime. In the vet clinic, Morales spoke without notes. I've monitored his vitals under stress, post-op, post-mission, she told the recorder. No signs of chronic anxiety or unpredictable aggression. His response to the child incident was situational and protective, not unstable. If that dog's a danger, so is every human being who's ever flinched the wrong way near a crosswalk. Even Barnes, gruff and conflicted, offered more than Luke expected. I signed the recommendation because the board leaned that way and the politics are what they are, the chief said, jaw tight. Off the record, Thor's not the problem. The people worried about headlines are. Between those pockets of support was Carver. Luke ran into him outside the admin building, where a light wind flapped the flags against their poles. The risk manager stood on the steps with a tablet in hand, talking quietly to a man in a contractor's polo. Logos lined the guy's clipboard, shipping companies, logistics firms, a security corporation Luke recognized from overseas. Carver saw him and excused himself smoothly. Petty Officer Walker, busy day? I'm sure you've been keeping track, Luke said. Carver's smile was friendly, almost sympathetic. Jag filed a stay, efficient work. Harris is good at what she does. So are you, Luke said. He didn't bother to make it a compliment. Carver glanced at the cranes on the horizon. You know what keeps multi-billion-dollar projects on schedule, Walker? Predictability. Investors don't like variables. Politicians don't like messy stories. Dogs that bite kids, no matter the context, are messy stories. He saved that kid. Did the headline say that? Carver asked mildly. Or the social posts? The photos? The mother's statement, "Perception is reality. My job is to minimize the kinds of realities that cost this base money and clout. And if that means killing a decorated working dog, it means making hard choices in service of the greater good." There was no malice in his tone. That made it worse. One animal already nearing the end of optimal service life versus the economic security of thousands of sailors and civilian workers this expansion will support. You've been downrange, Walker. You understand sacrifice. Wind tugged at Luke's collar. Far off, waves slapped rhythmically against the pier. "This isn't sacrifice," he said slowly. "Sacrifice is given. This is taking." "Call it what helps you sleep," Carver replied. "The board will confirm the recommendation. Your appeal will be noted and dismissed. My suggestion, make peace with that. Don't tie your career to a lost cause." Luke studied him. "Is that a threat?" "It's advice," Carver said. Then, after a beat, "But if you insist on hearing it as a threat, you might consider why." He turned and rejoined the contractor, already shifting back into easy, polished conversation. To anyone passing by, they could have been discussing lunch options. Luke walked away, jaw aching from the effort it took not to speak. By evening, he'd delivered Harris the recorded statements. She'd promised to work through the night. "If command's going to ignore me," she'd said, "they'll at least have to step over a pile of inconvenient facts." On his way back to the kennels, the base felt different, edges sharper, every camera lens an eye, every passing car potentially carrying someone who'd prefer if he stopped pushing. He keyed into the kennel building out of habit more than choice. The metal door groaned the same way. The smell hit him the same. But as soon as it shut behind him, he knew something was off. The hairs on his arms rose. The air was wrong, not in scent, but in silence. No shuffle, no soft whine. The usual rustle of bodies repositioning had been replaced by stillness. Thor didn't come to the gate when Luke turned the corner. He was there, lying on his mat, eyes wide open, body coiled but motionless, nose pointed toward the rear service door. He wasn't relaxed. He wasn't asleep. He was waiting. Luke's breath slowed automatically. "Easy," he murmured. Thor didn't look at him. His ears flicked once, then locked forward again, tracking something Luke couldn't see. Metal rasped faintly from the far side of the wall. A latch, maybe, a whispered hinge. Someone else was here, or had just been. Luke placed his palm on the gate, quiet and steady, listening to the thin vibrations of the building around them. Whatever was coming at them next, it wasn't going to be just lines on paper anymore. Luke stayed still, palm on the gate, listening. The building had its own language, rattles when the wind hit wrong, distant compressor hum from the vet clinic next door, the faint grind of pipes. He knew those sounds. This had been different, intentional, a metallic whisper where there shouldn't have been one. Thor's breathing was shallow, nostrils flaring, ears locked forward. His tail didn't move. The muscles along his flanks were tight as cable. "Show me," Luke murmured. He unlatched the gate slowly, making sure the hinge didn't creak. Thor flowed out, not breaking posture, belly low, weight distributed for a controlled burst if needed. Luke gave a tiny hand cue. 2 fingers down. Search. The Malinois moved like smoke toward the back corridor, nose working, paws barely whispering against the concrete. Luke followed offset on his right, instinctively falling into the stack position he'd used 100 times in tight hallways overseas. They reached the service door. The steel bar shiver clicked against its housing when Luke pressed it with 2 fingers, not fully latched. Someone had opened it recently and not let it slam. Thor's nose touched the gap. He inhaled, then sneezed once, sharply, clearing his sinuses. His tail gave a single, uncertain flick. Chemical trace, something that didn't belong. Luke's pulse kicked. He eased the door open, stepping out into the narrow alley that ran behind the kennels. A dumpster squatted to one side, lid closed. Beyond that, chain-link fence. Beyond that, just the back of supply warehouses and a strip of gravel. No footprints were visible in the packed dirt. No cigarette butts still smoking. Whoever had been here knew how to leave quietly. He checked the dumpster anyway. Empty, except for black trash bags and the sour smell of bleach and old kibble. Thor snuffled along the base of the wall, nose darting from one brick to another. He stopped at a spot knee-high, sniffed longer, then licked once at the concrete and pulled back with a low chuff. Luke crouched, squinting. A faint smear darkened the wall, not quite color, more texture, a slight matte patch against the gray. He pressed his fingertips there, then brought them to his own nose. Bitter, synthetic, not quite familiar, but it tugged at some old training memory. Med kits, syringes, lab vials. Sedative, maybe, or residue from someone who had been working with it. His skin crawled. "Okay," he whispered. "That's enough." He guided Thor back inside, relatching the door and sliding the internal bolt all the way until it clicked. He checked the other exits, the window locks, the camera domes in the ceiling corners, silent black eyes that fed to a hard drive in the office. In Thor's run, he knelt and ran both hands down the canine's sides, checking for any pinpoint irritation, any tiny puncture. Nothing. Thor accepted the exam calmly, then pushed his forehead into Luke's chest and exhaled, a long, hot breath that felt like both apology and relief. Luke stayed there for a moment, fingers curled in the fur at the base of his neck. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere outside, a car door thudded and an engine started. Normal sounds, thin cover over something that wasn't normal at all. "Somebody tried to get close to you," he murmured, "without going through the front. That's not happening again." On his way out, he detoured to the kennel office. The duty log hung on its clipboard, neat lines of ink tracking feedings, exercise, meds. Barnes's signature topped the last entry. No mention of approved access to the rear. He stared at the security monitor, the cheap system they'd installed to cover the main hallway and front door. No feed from the back. Budget hadn't stretched that far. Of course it hadn't. By the time he hit Chief Barnes's number, his jaw ached from how tight he'd been clenching it. "You sure he's okay?" Barnes asked after listening, voice low and rough over the line. "Far as I can tell, no injection site, no altered behavior beyond alert. But somebody was at the back door, didn't log in, didn't latch it right. There's something on the wall smells like meds." A pause. Paper rustled on the other end. "I'll pull the access records," Barnes said. "Card swipes, camera from the adjoining building. Might just be a lazy janitor. And if it's not, then someone's poking where they shouldn't," the chief replied. "You and I both know who benefits if Thor suddenly starts acting off right before the board meets." "Carver wouldn't get his own hands dirty," Luke said. "No, but money talks. Some people on this base haven't heard enough of the right words in a while." Luke stared at the kennel ceiling, watching a dead bug spin slowly in a fluorescent diffuser. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Document it," Barnes said. "Write it up as a possible unauthorized attempt to access an MWD. Keep your tone clinical. No accusations we can't prove. I'll file it through proper channels. And Walker? Yeah? Do not go hunting on your own. You find someone in that alley without a good reason, I don't need today's problem turning into tomorrow's assault report. Clear?" The admonition stung because it wasn't wrong. The image of his fist connecting with Carver's jaw had been too vivid, too often lately. "Clear," he said. He wrote the incident report that night, every detail distilled down to dry language. Odor detected. Door partially unlatched. K9 in sustained alert posture. Unknown residue present, sent, logged. Another entry in a system already bending under the weight of conflicting stories. The answer came the next morning in the form of a summons. He was halfway through a run on the seawall, gray waves pounding below when his phone buzzed. A base-wide number. "Petty Officer Walker," a disembodied voice said when he answered. "You are directed to appear before the K9 Utilization Review Board at 1,000 hours in Conference Room B, Admin Building. This concerns MWD Thor, serial number—" "I know who he is," Luke said. "Attendance is mandatory," the voice continued. "Failure to—" "I'll be there." The line clicked dead. The board was everything the kennels were not. Carpet instead of concrete, coffee instead of bleach, frame certificates instead of chain link. 5 people sat behind a table, a commander from operations, someone from medical, Barnes as the K-9 subject matter expert, a civilian risk rep, not Carver, but one of his, and Harris for JAG. Carver himself sat off to the side, tablet open, eyes pleasant, an observer, not technically part of the decision, yet somehow in the room. A folder with Thor's name on it lay in front of the commander. It looked thin, too thin, given everything the dog had done. "Petty Officer Walker," the commander said, "thank you for coming." Luke sat in the single chair opposite them. The room smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner and fresh coffee. "Let's be concise," the commander continued. "We are here to review the risk assessment and euthanasia recommendation for MWD Thor. JAG has filed an appeal and stay. We will hear their arguments and yours, review the documentation, and make a final determination." Harris spoke first, crisp and measured. She laid out Thor's record: deployments, commendations, successful missions. She played a short clip from helmet cam footage, Thor working a live alley in Afghanistan, focused and steady despite gunfire. "This is not an unstable asset," she said. "This is a proven MPC with a single, disputed incident stateside." The civilian rep countered with metrics and liability charts. "One incident is statistically irrelevant until it isn't," he said. "All it takes is one high-profile case to undermine public trust." Barnes surprised Luke by leaning in. "With respect, sir, public trust is also undermined when we discard loyal working partners at the first sign of discomfort. Our handlers see that. They internalize what it means." Carver's tablet screen reflected up onto his face, washing him in cool blue. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His arguments were already woven into the civilians' talking points. "Petty Officer Walker," the commander said at last, "explain in your own words why Thor should not be euthanized." Luke's throat was dry. He wished irrationally for the rough cotton of a deployment tee instead of the stiff collar digging into his neck. "He did his job," he said simply. "He was trained to identify threats and move first. At that crosswalk, he saw a car that wasn't stopping. The girl didn't. I didn't. He moved. If his teeth hadn't brushed her arm, she'd have a broken pelvis or worse. The only reason we're sitting here talking about liability instead of attending a funeral is that dog." The commander's gaze didn't soften. "And your prior record? The incident 3 years ago where another MPC's alert was misread?" Luke didn't look away. "I made a mistake. People paid for it. I've lived with that every day since. Thor has never been punished for my failures, and he shouldn't be punished for my success in letting him do what he's trained for." Silence stretched. The air conditioner kicked on, sending a faint chill down the back of his neck. Harris slid a final document across the table. "We are not asking the board to ignore risk forever," she said. "We are requesting that Thor be allowed to retire from service and be adopted by Petty Officer Walker, with appropriate restrictions and monitoring. No further duty assignments, no public demonstrations, no unsecured contact without handler present. This mitigates risk while honoring service. Euthanasia is irreversible. Adoption is not." The board members exchanged looks, silent communications simmering beneath neutral expressions. Carver finally spoke, voice mild. "If I may, Commander?" "You're an observer." "Mr. Carver," Harris said sharply. The commander hesitated, then nodded, briefly. Carver folded his hands. "I sympathize with the emotional component here, truly, but we have to consider precedent. If we allow adoption in this case, every future handler with a compromised dog will expect the same. We will be flooded with appeals. The clear line we have now will blur. That makes it harder to protect this command from unfortunate outcomes." He glanced at Luke, just long enough to acknowledge him without truly seeing him. "And while Petty Officer Walker's devotion is commendable, it may cloud his judgment. His prior file suggests a pattern of over-identification with his animals. That is not ideal when evaluating risk objectively. The words landed with the dull, heavy impact of sandbags, slow, suffocating. Luke kept his face still. Inside, something coiled tighter. "We have heard enough," the commander said at last. "We will confer. You will be notified of our decision." The meeting dissolved into low voices and paper shuffling. Harris squeezed Luke's forearm once as he stood. In the hallway outside, where the light was harsher and the carpet ended, she caught up to him. "They're not giving anything away," she said. "But they listened more than I expected. That's something." "Is it enough?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. A passing ensign hurried by, eyes down, clutching a folder like a life raft. "I'll know more when I see the written decision," she said finally. "For now, there is one thing I have to tell you." The way she said it made his stomach drop. "They're moving Thor to a secure holding facility," she continued. "Off base. Standard procedure when there's a disputed risk determination and an allegation of tampering. Because of the incident report I filed. Because someone tried to get to him, and they can't be seen leaving him in your kennels while this plays out," she said. "On paper, it's to preserve chain of custody. In practice, it means you won't have access, no visits, no contact, not until there's a final order." The hallway seemed to narrow around him, walls inching closer. "When?" he asked. "Transport scheduled for 0600 tomorrow," she said. "If you want to see him before that, you have tonight. I suggest you use it." Her phone buzzed. She checked it, lips pressing together. "I have to go. I'll fight this, Walker. But I can't promise—" "I know," he said. She left in a swirl of paperwork and quiet frustration. Luke stood alone in the corridor, listening to the distant echo of footsteps and the faint clack of a printer somewhere behind a half-open door. Tomorrow morning, Thor would be loaded into a different crate, onto a different truck, taken to a place with no familiar smells, no known routines, held there while other people decided whether he lived or died. Tonight was all they had. He headed for the kennels, each step measured, the weight of the coming hours settling on his shoulders like a ruck he couldn't set down. Somewhere ahead, a dog who trusted him was waiting for a command he didn't know how to give. The kennels were different at night. The harsh fluorescent glare was gone, replaced by a softer wash of security lights spilling in from the corridor. The fans hummed low, steady, a white noise that had lulled 100 dogs to sleep over the years. Tonight it just made the silence feel thicker. Thor stood before Luke even reached his run, ears pricked, weight forward. His paws shifted once, then stilled, the only sign he had been pacing. "Easy," Luke murmured. He keyed the lock and stepped inside. Thor didn't explode toward him like a house pet finally seeing its owner. He closed the distance in a straight line, controlled, then leaned his full weight against Luke's thigh and pressed his head under Luke's hand in a slow, deliberate push. "Contact. Check in. You good?" Luke's fingers tightened in the fur at the back of his neck. "Hey, partner." He dropped to one knee on the concrete. It was cold through his fatigues. Thor shifted to match the height, nose close enough that Luke could feel the warm puff of each breath on his cheek. He had done this hundreds of times, pre-mission, post-mission, in dusty yards overseas and in sterile stateside kennels. It had always been part of the work cycle. Tonight it wasn't about work at all. He unhooked Thor's collar so the metal wouldn't dig, then sank both hands into the dog's ruff, feeling the dense undercoat, the scar ridge along the Malinoise's shoulder where a fragment had once torn through. Thor exhaled again, slower this time, then sat. His eyes never left Luke's. "They're moving you in the morning," Luke said quietly. "Secure facility, new smells, new routines." Thor's only answer was a small tilt of his head, a blink, a shift of weight closer. "I tried to stop it." Luke managed a dry half-laugh that wasn't really a laugh. Didn't even slow them down. He glanced down the row of runs. Most were empty tonight. 2 younger dogs slept in loose coils, twitching occasionally as their paws chased something in dreams. A red status tag hung on the end of Thor's gate, a temporary notation that suddenly felt like a verdict. Luke rubbed behind one ear in the exact way he knew Thor liked, fingers making small circles. "You remember what I told you the night before Helmand?" he asked. His brain supplied the memory whether he wanted it or not. A different kennel, different continent, same smell of bleach and dog and cold concrete. Thor younger, more restless, vibrating with energy that barely contained itself, the fear knot in Luke's stomach so tight he could hardly swallow. He'd steadied his own hands back then by gripping Thor's harness and whispering almost angrily, "Some promises don't fade, they wait. I'm not leaving you behind." The words felt foolish now, sitting in his chest like a stone. Time and bureaucracy didn't care about things whispered in dusty kennels. He didn't repeat them out loud. He just pressed his forehead briefly to Thor's and stayed there, breathing in the clean, warm dog smell under the layer of disinfectant. Thor's tail thumped once, a single soft beat against concrete, then was still. A coolant unit kicked on in the corner with a low rumble. Somewhere outside, a gull screamed over the bay, thin sound knifing through the night. Luke stayed until his legs went numb and his back ached from the slight hunch. He checked Thor's paws, his teeth, his eyes. More from habit than necessity, looking for anything he could put into a report, any ammo he could use. All he found was the same animal he'd gone downrange with, steady, reading him, waiting for a job. When he finally stood, Thor rose immediately, mirroring him. Luke clipped the collar back on with hands that suddenly didn't feel like his. "I'll see you soon," he said. Thor blinked once, then licked the air near Luke's chin, missing by a fraction like he always did when he wasn't permitted full contact, trained restraint even in affection. Luke stepped out before he could change his mind and sleep on the concrete. The gate closed with a muted clang. He forced himself not to look back more than once. The kennel lights dimmed behind him as he went out into the cooler night, salt air wrapping around him. The base was quiet, just the distant thrum of a generator, the intermittent flash of a beacon out on the black water. Morning came gray and early. The transport truck arrived 10 minutes ahead of schedule, as if afraid someone might change their mind. It backed up to the kennel loading bay with a beep, beep, beep that felt obscenely cheerful. Two handlers in unfamiliar uniforms climbed out, accompanied by a lieutenant Luke didn't know. The lieutenant's clipboard looked heavier than it was. "Petty Officer Walker?" he asked. "That's me. We're here to take custody of MWD Thor as per the order." He offered the clipboard. "Sign here to confirm transfer." The form was perfect. Print neat, boxes checked, signatures already in place above, a tidy pathway to somewhere Thor didn't understand. "Where exactly are you taking him?" Luke asked. "Secure veterinary evaluation facility," the lieutenant said, tone neutral. "He'll be well cared for." That wasn't an answer, and both of them knew it. Luke signed anyway. His refusal would accomplish nothing except put someone else's name on the line. Thor came calmly when Luke went to get him, leash clipped, gait smooth. He hopped into the transport crate on command, turned, and lay down facing the door, paws braced. "Stay," Luke told him, voice level. Thor's ears flicked once. He obeyed. The handlers locked the crate, double-checking latches. They loaded it into the truck like any other piece of equipment. 4 hands on the edges, back straight, lift on 3. Luke stepped back out of the way. The crate slid into the dim cargo space with a scrape. For a second. As they adjusted straps, he could see Thor's eyes through the bars, calm, focused, waiting for the next instruction. He had to fight the urge to bark out a "here" that would undo the entire process. The door shut with a metallic boom that seemed to echo longer than it physically should have. The truck pulled away, tail lights glowing red in the morning mist, before disappearing around the bend toward the main gate. The kennels felt wrong afterward, too quiet, too much empty space in the row where Thor had been. Barnes found him standing in the middle of the run aisle, hands in loose fists at his sides. He'll think you abandoned him, Luke said, not sure if he was talking to Barnes or himself. We both know that dog knows you better than that, Barnes replied. He's in a crate in a truck going somewhere unfamiliar. Feels like any other TDY to him right now. For how long? Barnes didn't answer. He just looked tired. Days blurred. Luke still reported to work. He cleaned runs, exercised other dogs, checked equipment. His body went through the motions while his mind tracked the absence like a radar locked onto a missing signal. He stopped sleeping more than a couple of hours at a stretch. Every time he closed his eyes, the crate thunked shut again in his head. Harris kept him updated with what she could. The board had requested additional documentation, medical evaluations, behavior assessments from the new facility. A week later, her text buzzed his phone like a small explosion. "Call me, now." He ducked into an empty equipment room, smell of rubber mats and detergent sharp in his nose, and hit dial. "They had an incident at the holding facility," she said without preamble. "Official report says Thor went after a vet tech during a routine exam." His stomach flipped. What happened? According to the write-up, Tech approached the crate, dog lunged, teeth contacted forearm through bars. No broken skin, just pressure, but they labeled it unprovoked aggression. Unprovoked, he repeated flatly, in a strange facility, with a stranger reaching into his space. "I know," she said, "but that word is all some people on the board are going to see. The facility recommended immediate euthanasia. They're citing escalating behavior." "Did you talk to the tech?" he asked. "They're not returning my calls yet," she said. "I'm pushing through other channels, but I did get a look at the security system overview in their SOP. They should have camera coverage of all kennel approaches." "Should?" "Yeah." The silence between them hummed. Luke could hear his own pulse in his ears, a heavy, slow drum. "What does this mean?" he asked. "It means Carver's side just got ammunition," Harris said. "The board has moved up their final session. They're meeting in 48 hours to decide. If we don't counter this, they're going to sign off on putting him down as soon as they can schedule it." The words hung there. Put him down. Luke set his forehead briefly against the cool metal of a storage locker. "What can we do?" he asked. "I'm filing an emergency motion to compel release of the kennel footage," she said. "If there was any provocation, any mishandling, we need it. But the legal process is slow, and they know it. We're going to be racing the clock." "And Thor doesn't have time," Luke said. "No," she agreed quietly. "He doesn't." Another pause. Water pipes knocked somewhere in the walls, an old building shifting. "Walker," she said, voice tightening, "I need you to decide something. Up until now, we've been fighting this inside the system. Paper, hearings, quiet pressure. If that footage shows the tech screwed up and they're hiding it, we might have grounds to blow this up. Media, outside advocacy, the whole 9 yards. But once we go that route, there's no going back. It'll get loud, messy. Carver will come after you professionally." The idea of reporters and headlines made his skin crawl. He had spent years avoiding cameras, avoiding being the story, but Thor didn't get to choose how quietly he died. Luke straightened, fingers flexing once at his sides. "What happens if we don't?" he asked. "Then, in a week," Harris said softly, "there's a stainless steel table in a back room somewhere, and a black bag, and a line in a logbook that says euthanized per board order." The room seemed to tilt for a second. He caught himself on the locker handle. "Pull the footage," he said. "If they stonewall, we go loud. Use my name. Use whatever you need." "You're sure?" "No," he said, "but we're out of sure. All we have left is what's right." On the other end of the line, he heard the faint scratch of her pen against paper as she wrote something down. "Okay," she said. "Then we move. 48 hours. Don't go anywhere I can't reach you." The call ended. The locker's metal pressed cool against his palm. 48 hours to drag the truth into daylight. 48 hours before someone with a syringe and a form number turned his partner into a statistic. He stepped out of the equipment room, the kennels stretching ahead of him in a long, echoing corridor, empty runs on either side, one that felt emptier than the rest. For the first time since Thor had been loaded into the truck, Luke didn't just feel the absence. He pushed against it. The footage didn't come easily. Harris called that night, voice sharpened by fatigue and caffeine. "They're dragging their feet," she said. "Facility counsel says they'll endeavor to comply with our request after their internal review." "Internal review," Luke repeated. He sat on the floor of his apartment, back to the wall, boots still on. The place smelled faintly of old coffee and sea air sneaking in through poorly sealed windows. "Meaning they have something to hide. Meaning they want time to edit," she said, "or time to make the tape disappear." A car rolled past outside, headlights sweeping shadows along his wall. His phone screen lit his palm a cold blue. "What can I do?" he asked. "You can be at the board hearing tomorrow at 0800 in the base legal conference room," she said. "And you can keep your temper when Carver starts posturing. I'll handle the rest." He almost said that keeping his temper hadn't been a problem for years. Then he remembered the way his hand had felt on the collar of the cop who shot Dax. Maybe he shouldn't overestimate himself. "Copy," he said instead. "Walker," she added softer. "Get some sleep." He didn't. Not really. He dozed in short snatches, white bursts of nothing broken by images his brain kept dragging up, Thor's crate door closing, a stainless table, the helpless twitch of paws that didn't understand. At 4 a.m. he gave up, showered too hot, scrubbed his face until the skin felt raw, and put on his dress uniform for the first time in months. The fabric sat stiff on his shoulders, collar snug at his throat. The ribbons felt like someone else's story pinned to his chest. The conference room was too bright. Legal always was. Flat, unforgiving lighting over a long table that turned everyone into their own worst photograph. Carver sat at the far end, immaculate in a dark suit, a neat stack of folders aligned perfectly before him. A small flag pin glinted on his lapel. Two other board members flanked him, a commander from medical, a civilian ethicist with a laptop open and ready. The empty chair opposite was for Harris, two more along the side wall for interested parties. Luke took one of them. Barnes slid into the other a minute later, tie slightly crooked, jaw working like he was chewing something that wouldn't go down. Harris arrived with a battered leather briefcase and no coffee, which meant she was serious. She greeted no one, dropped the briefcase on the table, and sat. Her hair was pulled back tighter than usual. There were faint smudges under her eyes. "Good morning," Carver said smoothly once the recorder light blinked red. "This session of the Military Working Dog Review Board is now in order." He went through the formalities, case number, date, attendees. The words washed over Luke like static. He heard only what mattered. Presented with documented evidence of a pattern of unstable and dangerous behavior, culminating in the unprovoked attack on civilian law enforcement and subsequent aggression toward veterinary personnel. Harris didn't let him get far. "Counsel objects to the characterization of pattern and unprovoked," she said, "and requests that any conclusions be withheld until all evidentiary material has been properly reviewed." "Your objection is noted," Carver replied without missing a beat. "You brought this board no new evidence at the last session. If you have something different today, now would be the time." "I do." Harris popped open her briefcase and pulled out a drive in a labeled bag. "This is a copy of the kennel corridor footage from the facility at the time of the alleged aggression incident." The medical officer frowned. "I was under the impression the facility denied having any footage that covered that specific approach." "They did," Harris said. "Right up until last night, when a judge signed an order compelling production." She looked directly at Carver when she added, "It's amazing what shows up when people are assured they won't be held liable for obeying the law." For the first time since Luke had met him, Carver's composure thinned. Not much, just a tightness at the corner of his mouth. "We haven't had opportunity to review that for authenticity," he said. "It would be inappropriate to—" "The court order included chain of custody documentation," Harris cut in. "If you'd like to question that in front of a military judge, I will happily schedule it. For now, the board asked for facts. This is a fact." The ethicist cleared her throat. I think we should at least view the footage. Our role is to understand context, not just read summaries. Carver hesitated just long enough to reveal it was a concession and not his idea. Then he nodded to the tech in the corner. The screen on the wall flared to life, gray and grainy. The camera angle showed a kennel corridor not unlike Luke's own, a row of crates, doors facing the central aisle. Thor's was fourth from the end. Even in black and white, and even with the small resolution, Luke recognized the set of his posture immediately. He watched himself in negative, the steady sit, the quiet focus, ears forward but not pinned, weight centered. Alert, not agitated. Time stamped in the corner. The door at the far end opened. A young man in scrubs walked in, carrying a clipboard and a tote of supplies. No gloves, no handler. He's alone, Barnes muttered under his breath. The tech strolled down the line, stopping at each crate to glance at paperwork. He didn't speak to the dogs. His gait was loose, casual. When he reached Thor's crate, he flipped through the clipboard without really looking. Thor remained in a sit, gaze tracking him. The tech set the tote down, then, in one smooth, careless motion, popped the crate latch and yanked the door halfway open with his foot. No, Luke heard himself say, or thought maybe he'd said it inside. Every handler he knew had felt the jolt. On screen, Thor surged to his feet, startled by the sudden movement. The tech, caught off balance, stumbled. His arm shot out, not in a measured offering gesture, but a defensive flail, hand landing roughly on Thor's muzzle, pushing. Thor did what he had been trained his whole working life to do when an unknown hand grabbed his face through a restricted opening. He snapped, not savage, not wild. Controlled, a clear back off. His teeth closed on the sleeve, a brief clamp and release. The tech jerked back, clutching his arm with theatrical speed. He kicked the door shut with a bang, then spun toward the far end, mouth moving fast as he hurried out of frame. The whole incident took maybe 3 seconds. No raised hackles, no prior pacing, no run at the door. Just a dog in a crate and a man who treated him like equipment. The footage froze. Nobody spoke for a long beat. The hum of the projector filled the room. That, Harris said quietly, is not unprovoked aggression. That is a trained military working dog responding to an unexpected physical grab in an enclosed space. A grab in violation of standard MWD handling protocols. Carver steepled his fingers. Be that as it may, the tech was injured. His own supervisor's report listed no broken skin. Harris replied, merely pressure and bruising. Yet I note the term attack in your summary to this board, Captain. Stronger language than the actual incident supports. The ethicist looked from the screen to Luke. Petty Officer Walker, she said, in your professional opinion as Thor's primary handler, is what we just saw consistent with his baseline behavior? Luke's throat had gone dry. He swallowed once. Yes, ma'am, he said. Thor has never gone looking for a fight, but he will respond to unexpected contact like that every time. It's what we trained him to do. If that tech had approached correctly, Thor would have tolerated the exam, just like he's tolerated every other invasive thing we've ever done to him. The medical officer shifted in his chair, discomfort plain. It appears the facility staff may need supplemental training on MWD-specific handling, he conceded. That's one way to put it, Barnes muttered. Carver regrouped quickly. We can't acknowledge facility error, he said smoothly. However, that does not negate the previous incident with civilian law enforcement. Thor's overall risk profile remains high. And how many of those incidents, Harris asked, were the result of having a weapon pointed directly at his handler? Carver's jaw flexed. We're not here to relitigate San Diego. No, she said. We're here to decide if this animal should die because humans keep putting him in bad positions and then blaming him for reacting like the tool we made him. The word hung there. Die. The ethicist closed her laptop slowly. I need a recess, she said. We all do, I think. 10 minutes. She didn't wait for Carver's assent. She stood and walked out. The medical officer followed, rubbing his forehead. Carver remained, eyes on the frozen frame of Thor in his crate. When they were alone with just the hum of the projector, he spoke without looking at Luke. "Even if we rule in your favor today, petty officer, that dog is a liability," he said. "Here in the civilian world, anywhere his drive outpaces the understanding of the people around him." Luke felt the heat flare in his chest, then banked it down. "Then give him to someone who understands him," he said. "You're right. He doesn't belong in a kennel staffed by techs who treat him like a broken box fan. He belongs with the one person he has spent his whole life reading." Harris shot him a warning glance. He kept going anyway. "You're worried about risk assessment," he said, voice even. "How about this? You let a stranger put him down in a back room, or you let the one man who can actually control him sign the adoption paperwork and take full responsibility. Which version do you want on your conscience?" Carver's eyes finally left the screen and met his. "You assume I have one," he said mildly. It was a joke, maybe. Luke couldn't tell. The door opened. The ethicist came back in, face more settled. She took her seat, folded her hands, and looked at Carver. "We've seen enough," she said. "Let's vote." Luke's pulse ticked up, each beat a slow hammer. Whatever happened next wasn't going to stay inside this room. The vote didn't feel like a vote. It felt like a verdict on every choice Luke had made since the desert. The ethicist went first. "Based on the footage, the handler's testimony, and the facility's own handling protocols," she said, "I do not support euthanasia. Thor's behavior is consistent with his training and environment. I recommend immediate removal from the current facility and reassignment to a home environment with his handler, who has demonstrated both capacity and willingness to manage his drives." The medical officer cleared his throat. He looked older than he had an hour ago. "I concur," he said. "From a veterinary risk perspective, I don't see an animal beyond management. I see an animal in the wrong setting. I also recommend against maintaining him indefinitely in a kennel. Prolonged high-stress confinement is a welfare concern." 2 votes, both in Thor's favor. Carver didn't move for a long moment. Then he leaned back, exhaled softly, and let his gaze rest on the still image of the dog on the wall. "Let the record show," he said calmly, "that I dissent." Harris's fingers tightened slightly on her pen. "But," Carver continued, "given the board majority, I will not block their recommendation. The euthanasia order is rescinded. Thor will be formally retired from active service." Luke felt the words land, dull and heavy. Relief didn't come clean. It came tangled with something else, wariness, waiting for the catch. It arrived on schedule. "However," Carver added, "due to the liability profile outlined in my previous findings, I will require additional review before approving any adoption by Petty Officer Walker. Until then, Thor will remain under Navy custody at an alternate contract facility." There it was. Life, but not freedom. Harris didn't bother hiding her frustration. "On what legal basis do you propose separating a retired military working dog from his primary handler?" she asked. "There is an established adoption pipeline." "Which is a policy, not a right," Carver said. "I am willing to entertain adoption. I am not willing to rubber stamp it while my name is attached to the risk assessment. I want a comprehensive behavior evaluation from a civilian specialist with no prior relationship to the animal or handler. Then we'll revisit." "How long?" Luke asked. It came out rougher than he wanted. The question had weight in it he couldn't strip away. Carver looked at him, that cool administrative mask back in place. "As long as it takes to do it correctly," he said. "You may be satisfied with gut feeling, Petty Officer. I answer to paper." Harris opened her mouth, thought better of it, and closed it again. The ethicist spoke instead. "I want that evaluation completed within 30 days, she said. "And I want to see the name of the evaluator before it's scheduled. If this drags out, or if the evaluator is clearly biased, I will revisit my position and not in Captain Carver's favor." "Duly noted," Carver said. He banged the gavel lightly, even though he hadn't used it all morning. "Board is adjourned." Chairs scraped, papers shuffled. The projector whined as it spun down, leaving the wall blank and glaring white. Luke stood. His knees felt less steady than they did jumping from a helo in full kit. In the corridor outside, the air was marginally softer. Harris walked beside him, jaw tight, eyes distant. "So he lives," Luke said, "in a different cage with a new countdown." "It's not nothing," she said. "No one's putting a needle in his leg this week." "That bar used to be higher," he said. She stopped, turned to face him, and lowered her voice. "Look at me," she said. "We cracked his wall. We got the order pulled, and the board on record recommending you as his home. Carver can stall, but if he plays games now, he's not just fighting you, he's fighting his own board's findings. That matters." He stared at the scuffed tile between them. 30 days is a long time in a place like that, he said quietly. "You know what stress does to these dogs." "I do," she said. "So we make sure it's not 30. "How?" She glanced up and down the hall, then back at him. "Barnes is already working the evaluator angle. I'll push from legal. You," she said, poking a finger lightly at his chest, "stay clean. No angry calls to the facility. No backdoor visits. You give them nothing to use against you." He thought of steel cages and concrete floors, of Thor pacing invisible tracks in his mind. "Doing nothing," he said, "has never been my strong suit." "Then reframe it," she said. "You're not doing nothing. You're waiting. There's a difference." The word brushed against something old. Some promises don't fade. They wait. He nodded once. "Fine," he said. "We wait." They didn't make it 30 days. On day 11, the call came in the middle of the afternoon while Luke was at the small gym off base, punching a heavy bag more than working out. His phone buzzed in the pocket of his sweats. He let it go 3 times before habit made him check. Unknown number. Local area code. He wiped his hands on a towel and answered. "Walker." "Petty Officer Luke Walker?" The voice was male, clipped. "This is Commander Reyes, base operations." Luke straightened instinctively. "Yes, sir." "I understand you are the former handler of MPC Thor designation Kilo 41, Reyes said, "and that you have an adoption request pending." "Yes, sir," Luke said, heart rate ticking up for reasons unrelated to exercise. "That's correct." "You'll be at Pier 7 tomorrow at 1300 in dress uniform," Reyes said. "There will be a formal ceremony on the quarterdeck of the Truman. Bring anyone you consider family." "Sir?" Luke said. He needed to hear it aloud in plain language. Reyes obliged. "By order of the Navy, Kilo 41 is being officially retired and released into your custody," he said. "We're doing this the right way, Walker, on paper and in front of witnesses." Shock hit like cold water, then something warmer underneath. "What about the evaluation?" Luke asked. "Conducted yesterday," Reyes said, "by a civilian specialist with more letters after his name than I can keep straight. His report classified Thor as high-drive, environmentally sensitive, suitable for experienced handler adoption only." A faint smile edged his tone. Captain Carver tried to stretch that into another delay. The Admiral read the whole file and made a decision. "The Admiral," Luke repeated. "Yes," Reyes said. "Turns out someone forwarded him a clip of that kennel footage, and your deployment record." The pause was deliberate. "Some promises don't fade in this outfit either, Walker. They end up in the right inbox." Luke swallowed once. "Yes, sir," he said softly. 1300, Reyes repeated. "Don't be late." The line went dead. For a moment, all Luke heard was the soft hiss of the gym's air conditioning and his own breathing. The heavy bag swayed gently on its chain where he had left it. Then he set the towel down, grabbed his things, and walked out into the daylight. The next day, the sky over the base was the kind of impossible blue that only seemed to show up when you had something heavy to do. The air smelled of salt and fuel and sun-warmed metal as he crossed the pier. USS Truman towered above him, gray and massive, a steel city anchored to the water. Ropes stretched taut from her hull to thick bollards on the concrete. A line of sailors in dress whites stood at attention along the rail, hands folded perfectly, faces forward. A temporary podium had been set up on the quarterdeck, a microphone waiting. A small cluster of people stood off to the side. Barnes in his one decent suit, Harris in uniform, a few faces from Luke's old team, Sylvie in a simple dress with sunglasses, hiding eyes that shimmered anyway. At the foot of the gangway, Reyes waited. His khakis were immaculate. His handshake was firm. "You clean up well, Walker," he said, eyeing Luke's ribbons. "Almost like you belong here." "Almost," Luke said. They went up together. The ceremony was short and formal, in the way only military things can be, brisk and ceremonial, weight wrapped in protocol. A petty officer read the order, voice carrying over the slap of water against the hull. In recognition of faithful and honorable service, MPC Thor Kilo 41 is hereby retired from active duty and released from the United States Navy to the custody of his handler, Petty Officer Second Class Luke Walker. Harris stepped forward, offering Luke a clipboard with the adoption paperwork. His signature looked strange next to the official stamps, permanent, in a different way than the ink on his enlistment forms. "Petty Officer Walker," Reyes said then, turning toward the gangway where a pair of handlers in training stood with a familiar lean figure between them. "By order of the Navy, this is your partner's official release." He nodded once to the trainee holding the leash. "Thor is back home with you." They slipped the clip free. For a heartbeat, Thor didn't move. The sunlight caught the graying fur at his muzzle, the faded patch on his tactical vest where the flag had been. Then he saw Luke, all the distance, all the sterile rooms and strange hands and strange smells, collapsed into a single line between them. "Come," Luke whispered. Thor exploded forward. His nails skittered on the non-skid, then found purchase. He ran full tilt down the line of sailors, ears pinned back, tail high, every muscle throwing itself toward the one fixed point in his world. Luke dropped to one knee without thinking, dress whites creasing, the world narrowing to tan and black and the soft thunder of pause. Thor hit him like he always had, hard enough to rock his balance, controlled enough not to knock him flat. Luke wrapped both arms around him, burying his face in the warm, familiar ruff at his neck. The dog whined, a high, raw sound he'd never heard from him in the field, a keening somewhere between joy and relief. "That's my boy," Luke managed. His voice cracked on the second word. He didn't care? Thor licked his jaw once, then leaned his full weight into him, as if confirming that this time he didn't have to go back behind a door. Around them, the ceremony moved on. Applause, the shuffle of shoes, someone clearing their throat behind the microphone. Harris's voice floated over, steady and professional, saying things about service and sacrifice and the bond between handler and K9. None of it landed. What landed was the feel of Thor's chest, rising and falling against his own, the heat of the deck under his knee, the faint tremor in the dog's legs easing second by second, as recognition sank past adrenaline into bone. Later, there were photos. Reyes shaking his hand, Barnes clapping him on the shoulder hard enough to jar his teeth, Sylvie wrapping her arms around both of them at once, laughing and crying into Thor's fur, as the dog squinted up at her with patient tolerance. "Let's take him home," she whispered. Home took shape slowly. There was paperwork and a new harness ordered online, one meant for walking and not war. There were adjustments. Thor pacing the apartment at night at first, checking every doorway, every window, until he seemed satisfied the perimeter held. Luke slept lighter those first weeks than he had overseas, not from fear, from listening. He listened to the soft pad of paws shifting on the hardwood, to the low huff Thor gave in his sleep when a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, to the silence when the nightmares came, and, for the first time in years, he woke with the weight of another heartbeat pressed along his legs instead of the echo of an explosion. They found a routine. Early mornings on the beach, Thor off-leash only where it was safe, his recall crisp, even when gulls screamed and waves crashed. Quiet afternoons where Luke flipped through course catalogs and civilian job postings while Thor snored at his feet, paws twitching in some dream of open spaces that didn't smell of cordite. Sometimes, on the bad days, Luke would sit on the floor beside him, back against the couch, arm resting along the dog's ribs. Thor would inch closer until there was no space at all. "You remember," Luke would murmur into one twitching ear, "all of it, and you came anyway." The world moved on. Carver rotated to a new assignment. Harris caught a bigger case and texted him sometimes with updates about other dogs, other handlers. Barnes took a posting closer to home. On a soft, overcast morning months later, Luke found himself back at the harbor, not in uniform this time, but in worn jeans and a hoodie. The same ship loomed in the distance. The water slapped gently at the pilings. Gulls argued overhead. Thor stood beside him, no tactical vest, just a simple collar with a tag that had his new address on it instead of a serial number. His fur had grown thicker. The scar along his flank had faded to a pale, twisted line under the coat. Luke watched the horizon for a long time, breath fogging faintly in the cool air. The ache in his shoulder pulsed in time with the small, ordinary sounds of the pier, the creak of rope, the clink of metal, the low murmur of voices somewhere behind them. He rested his hand on the warm crown of Thor's head, thumb tracing the curve of an ear that had heard too much. Some promises don't fade. They wait. He didn't say it aloud this time. He didn't need to. Thor leaned into his leg with deliberate weight, as if to answer something he couldn't hear. The world beyond the water went on being loud and complicated and unfinished. Here, for a moment, was just breath, fur, gray sky easing toward a lighter shade, and the steady quiet of a partner who had finally made it all the way home.